When is the people allowed to rebel against their incarceration, their ethnic cleansing, their abolition from the face of the earth? When is a war crime turning into genocide? Remarkable scholars, and most of them Jewish, did a lot of great work defining those limits.
What is going on, everybody? Lucas here. What you're about to watch is a former finance minister sitting across from Piers Morgan and doing something cable news is not built for. He brought actual economics to the fight. Yanis Varoufakis walked Morgan through the entire house of cards, the 2015 nuclear deal that was already working, that Trump ripped up not because it failed, but because Netanyahu asked him to. And the fact that when America launched this Iran war, there was no plan B. Varoufakis said it plainly, lamentably. There wasn't even a plan A. Meanwhile, gas is over $4. $40 a gallon, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and the national debt just crossed $38.9 trillion. Full breakdown at the end. Subscribe, and let's get into it.
Well, look, I am a very fierce opponent of nuclear weapons. I was, back in the time when I lived in Britain, I was a paid-up member of CND. So I'm never going to support anyone's right to own or to develop a nuclear weapon. But we live in a world where, the West is so complicit and so duplicitous. On the one hand, you have Israel that has violated every nuclear proliferation or anti-proliferation treaty there is. Nobody's talking about the nuclear weapons that Israel has.
Well, they don't even admit having them, do they?
Indeed. So they've broken every rule and regulation. Nobody's talking about it. Now, Piers, I don't think that Iran wants to develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, the previous Khamenei, the elder, the late Khamenei, I should say, took out a fatwa. I believe it was genuine. My understanding of what the Iranian government wants is they want to maintain their sovereign right to enrich uranium so that, if needs be, they can have a bomb. But they don't want to have a bomb because they've seen what happened.
But isn't that a large leap of faith, though, in a regime which, I mean, at best, this is a regime, it may well be a functioning regime, but it's unbelievably repressive to its own people. I think it's undeniable that it has funded and provided arms to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, to Hamas over the last 2 decades more. This is a very unpleasant regime which has promoted terrorism around the world and terrorized its own people. I mean, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, surely, in sort of saying, well, actually, they're not that bad, so therefore we should trust them about the enriched uranium, which they're enriching at quite a rate. We should trust them about other areas of how they go about their business. Should we?
Well, let me answer in 2 points, with 2 points. The first one is you should never trust anyone, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. We should trust and verify. But I remember the short stint I had in government, I also had the honor of having a brief discussion with Barack Obama in the White House. And this was in April 2015. I wanted to talk to him about Greece's debt disaster and our awful economic crisis. He didn't want to talk to me about that. He wanted to talk to me about how proud he was of his deal with Iran and with the European Union. Because that deal, you will recall, included extremely arduous verification processes. All the Iranian facilities would have been open for inspection by international inspectors. There would be cameras, there would be sensors, there would be everything that is necessary in order to trust and verify. So that's the first part of the question. Ironically, isn't it terribly ironic that if you think about it, the best that Donald Trump can get now is something like that agreement that Obama had already struck with the Iranians and the Europeans, and the Germans were really very, very gung-ho about it, including Angela Merkel, the chancellor at the time, and which then Donald Trump, the moment he was elected, not because he had any strong opinions about this, he just wanted to bring down anything that Obama had done, and it was a direct request by Israel. But the second thing I want to say, allow me, I need to say that Iran is the only country that has not invaded any of its neighbors. It was invaded brutally by Iraq. That invasion saw 500,000, 600,000 people die in Iran. Chemical weapons were used with the acknowledgement of support or, turning a blind eye of the West. The Houthis, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, partisans, guerrillas, call them terrorists, call them whatever you want. I don't call them terrorists. That Iran did support, where they are how shall I put it? They are movements that sprang out of many years of mishandling of the Middle East, let's put it very mildly, by the West. I mean, Hezbollah would never have happened. It would never have existed if Israel had not brutally invaded Lebanon in 1982. And then the Iranians supported them and funded them. Now, do you consider Hezbollah to be terrorists? Well, if you come from the Israeli side, yes. If you come from the Shiite population of South Lebanon, you consider them to be a lifeline. So, let's be nuanced about that.
But when you say, okay, but Yanis, when you say that Hamas are not terrorists, I mean, what we all witnessed on October the 7th was 3,000 people charging over a border and committing heinous acts of terror against any civilians they could get their hands on. And some military, but predominantly civilians. They were kidnapping babies, they kidnapped Holocaust survivors, they slaughtered young people at a music festival, they were bombing, setting fire to things, and so on. This is surely the most blatant act of terrorism imaginable. Why would you not categorize Hamas, at the very least post-October 7th, as terrorists?
I consider those to be hideous and heinous war crimes. And there's no two way about that.
But why not terrorism?
Well, because you see, I have a problem with terrorism because, the IRA used to be terrorist until we had the Good Friday Agreement. And then they became partners in peace. Nelson Mandela was admonished as a terrorist when I lived in England. Margaret Thatcher, I remember calling him a terrorist. And then he became one of the greatest statesmen in the world. So I have a problem with the word terror because you see the whole point about the hideousness of human endeavors when it comes to defeating one another is to terrorize one another. So I do believe in international law. International law is very clear. What happened, what you described, were war crimes. And I have no problem condemning them as war crimes. What I do not condemn, however, is an attempt by anyone, not just Palestinians, but by anyone, to escape an illegal fence around the open-air prison concentration camp that has been erected in order to deny them the human dignity. The whole existence of Gaza is not a country. Remember that. When they say, I remember when everybody was talking about the war between Israel and Gaza is not a country. It was an open prison camp or a concentration camp that was effectively utilized in order to propagate ethnic cleansing and a slow genocide. So, of course, these are extremely delicate distinctions to make, but they're very important distinctions to make. I recognize the right of Ukrainians to kill Russians when Russians are invading Ukraine, right? I do not recognize the right of Ukrainians to kill Russian civilians intentionally. So we have to stick to the great success of the human spirit in 1945 of introducing international law, whereby we have very clear definitions of what is allowed in war. When is a people allowed to rebel against their incarceration, their ethnic cleansing, their abolition from the face of the earth? When is a war crime turning into genocide? Remarkable scholars, and most of them Jewish, did a lot of great work defining those limits. That has it.
The third question people raise is, now the war is at the stage it's at, a month in, is it not essential for the future of the region, of the wider world, that Israel and the United States win that war? What do you say to people that argue that? In other words, the lesser of two evils.
Well, I'm sorry, that's the greatest of the two evils. Here you have an unlawful war started by Israel and by the United States. It's a criminal war. Anybody who tells me that the right solution to that is for the United States and Israel to win is essentially telling me that they have no concern at all about international law, and they would like to see the violators of international law be the victors. I can't see that.
What do you think is going to happen here, Yanis? Because, like I said at the start, I think Trump has made a big miscalculation. I think he was urged into doing this by Benjamin Netanyahu, who told him the people will rise up once we decapitate the leadership. We've got them all in our sights. We can take out the Ayatollah and then the rest will follow. And it just hasn't followed that way. And in fact, the Iranians have been waging kind of asymmetrical war, which has not meant meeting might with might, but has been meeting might with a very cunning strategy of closing the Straits of Hormuz and also targeting the neighboring Gulf states in a way that has, kept people away from going there, which has severely damaged the energy output and so on. This has been, from a tactical point of view, very cunning by the Iranians, and it has proved to be a very effective, so far, way of responding to far superior military firepower. Where does it go, this war?
Well, allow me to preface my answer by saying that the fact that Donald Trump didn't have a plan B, possibly because he was rushed into it by Israel, as you said, is inexcusable. The fact that he didn't even have a plan A is lamentable, because I can't see what his plan A was. And finally, the manner in which he's flip-flopping from calling for negotiations to promising total destruction, as if this is going to create some kind of constructive ambiguity that will threaten the government of Iran. It won't. They've been preparing for this now for a very long time. Everything that you described as their retaliation for the attack on their country has been utterly predictable, utterly predictable. Of course, they would shut down the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, who couldn't? I can't believe that in the Pentagon, there were people who didn't foresee this. So it's all a big puzzle. Now, you're asking me for a prediction. Allow me to indulge in a little bit of wishful thinking. I would like to imagine that, like the Roman emperors of the late Roman Empire, who sent legions to what is today Germany and got their backsides beaten by the Goths. Those Roman emperors would declare victory and hold a triumph in Rome. I hope that he does that. I hope that he gives us a long speech, 2-hour speech on why he won everything when he has won nothing, and retreats. But I very much fear that the escalation ladder is becoming an escalator now. And if he puts boots on the ground, even with a limited mission of taking, let's say, an island or two, in order to start bargaining after that with the Iranian government, I very much fear that the escalation ladder is going to be climbed by the Iranians, who will use the Houthis in order to block Suez. And then we will go from a major crisis when it comes to the oil market and generally our economies to a catastrophe.
Well, the problem is that they've realised in the last month that if you strangle the global supply of oil and gas and fertilizer, you can wield enormous, devastating economic power in a way that carries with it actually a lot of political power.
But didn't we know that, Piers? Didn't we all know that?
Well, look, clearly there has been, I would have thought these were obvious things. We're told that obviously that the administrations say from America and Israel, they knew this would happen. They were surprised by the scale of it. I'm not sure why you would be. I'm honestly, I'm completely mystified how this now, why it started, how it plays out. The mission statements have changed every 10 seconds. I'm no longer even sure they know what their goal is or what victory looks like. And I do fear we are tripping into, in the same way it happened with Iraq and with Vietnam and all these other places, that you start with a few hundred troops go in, and before you know it, it's a full-scale hellhole. And it's very hard to extricate from that. And that's what worries me about where we are now, because I just don't think Donald Trump quite knows what to do. And that's a pretty scary reality for the president.
Let's talk about what Varoufakis actually exposed in that exchange, because it goes deeper than a cable news debate. It was a live autopsy of exactly how we ended up here. Start with the 2015 nuclear deal, because that is the foundation of everything, and it completely destroys the establishment's narrative about why this war was necessary. Obama sat down with Varoufakis in April of that year and told him directly how proud he was of what they had built. Cameras inside Iranian facilities, sensors, international inspectors on the ground, arduous verification processes that gave the world exactly what it claimed to want. Trust and verify. It was working. The Europeans were fully committed. Germany was fully committed. And then Trump tore it apart the moment he got into office, not because of an intelligence failure, not because Iran violated it, but because Israel asked him to. That is not analysis. That is the documented record and the brilliant replacement strategy. Varoufakis laid it out with devastating simplicity. No plan B, and lamentably, not even a plan A. Think about what that means. The most powerful military on the planet launched a full-scale war against a nation that controls one of the most critical economic choke points on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz, with no defined objective, no exit strategy, and no coherent theory of what victory looks like. And when Iran did exactly what every analyst with a functioning brain knew they would do, closed the strait, targeted Gulf energy infrastructure, weaponized the global supply chain, the same people who made this decision acted surprised. Varoufakis said it plainly. Of course they shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon had analysts. They knew, which means either they knew and did it anyway, or the people making these decisions are genuinely incompetent. Neither answer is acceptable when working families are paying $4.40 a gallon at the pump because of it. Now let's talk about the nuclear hypocrisy, because this is the argument that never gets made on mainstream television, and Varoufakis made it directly. Israel has violated every nuclear non-proliferation treaty in existence. It is never admitted to having nuclear weapons. It is never submitted to international inspection. It operates outside every framework it demands other countries comply with. And nobody in the Western press says a word about it. But Iran, which signed the NPT, which allowed inspectors in under the 2015 deal, which the IAEA repeatedly confirmed was in compliance before Trump pulled out, Iran is the existential nuclear threat that required an immediate war. The selective application of that standard is not a policy position, it is a tell. It tells you exactly whose interests are being served and whose are not. The Hezbollah and Hamas framing deserves the same treatment Varoufakis gave it. He was not defending October 7th. He called those acts hideous and heinous war crimes without hesitation. What he refused to do was accept a label that the establishment uses specifically to shut down historical context. The IRA were terrorists until the Good Friday Agreement made them partners in peace. Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, according to Margaret Thatcher, until he became one of the greatest statesmen in history. The label is a political tool, not a moral framework, and Hezbollah specifically, as both Varoufakis and Morandi have now said in separate interviews, did not exist before Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. You cannot create the conditions that produce a resistance movement and then act confused about why it exists. Here are the numbers that the original creator correctly flagged, and they need to land with full weight. The national debt has crossed $38.9 trillion. The defense-based budget alone just hit $849.8 billion, pushing total defense spending toward $1 trillion. Gas is over $4.40 a gallon nationally. Fertilizer and shipping markets are fractured because the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Working families are being told to be patriotic while they cannot afford groceries. While the people who made this decision face zero accountability and the donors funding their campaigns are cashing defense contracts, Varoufakis gave Piers Morgan the most honest summary of where this ends. He compared it to the late Roman emperors who sent legions into Germany, got beaten by the Goths, and came home to declare victory anyway. His hope is that Trump does exactly that, claims a win, retreats, and we avoid the escalation ladder becoming an escalator. His fear is boots on the ground, Houthi blockades expanding, and what is already a major economic crisis becoming a catastrophe. That fear is well grounded because the mission statements have changed every 10 seconds, because nobody in power can define what winning looks like, because this is exactly how Vietnam started, exactly how Iraq started. A few hundred troops, a limited mission, and before anyone can stop it, a full-scale hellhole with no exit. The most dangerous people in Washington are not the ones pulling the triggers. They are the ones writing the checks without a plan. This channel is going to keep saying that until the people responsible are held accountable. Like this video, share it with someone still waiting for an explanation of what victory looks like. Subscribe to Lucas Rant. We are not done. See you in the next one.